The Rocky Pines National Park stretched wide beneath a fading afternoon sun, its jagged cliffs cutting against the sky like teeth. The air smelled of pine sap and damp stone, sharp with the promise of evening. Families were leaving the trails, their chatter fading, while the forest grew quieter with every passing minute. But not everyone had gone home. Detective Harry had been called to the northern edge of the park, where a trail ended abruptly near a steep gorge. The scene was already crowded with uniformed officers and park rangers. Yellow tape fluttered in the mountain wind. Beyond it, at the base of the rocky slope, lay the broken body of a young woman. Her name was Emily Carson, 24, a college student from Denver. Officially, it looked like a tragic accident. She had fallen during a jog on the trail. But Harry had seen enough accidents to know when something didn't feel right. A park ranger, broad-shouldered, sunburned, his badge reading Miller, stepped forward. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless. "She wasn't just some hiker," Miller said under his breath. "Emily was my cousin." Harry nodded slowly, studying him. That explained the man's stubbornness, the quiet anger in his voice. Miller glanced toward the ridge. "Before the cops showed up, I checked the ground myself. There were signs. Things that don't belong here." Harry raised a brow. "What kind of signs?" Miller hesitated, then pointed to a stretch of dirt near the trail. Harry crouched and studied the ground. Sure enough, there were hoof prints, deep, sharp-edged, far fresher than anything left by wild elk or deer. Horses. Several of them. "This is a national park," Miller said tightly. "No one's supposed to ride up here. Too dangerous. Too restricted." Harry felt a chill despite the sun still burning over the mountains. Horses meant riders. Riders meant people who didn't want to be seen. Before he could press further, a voice cut through the air. "That's enough, Miller." A police sergeant, stocky and red-faced, strode over. His badge gleamed in the last light of day, and his irritation was written all over his face. "Rangers aren't part of this investigation anymore. You stay out of it. Understood?" Miller's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Harry, however, met the sergeant's stare without flinching. "If there are unusual tracks, you might want to look into them instead of shoving people aside." The sergeant scowled. "You're here as a courtesy, Harry. Don't push it." But Harry didn't back down. He had learned long ago that authority often tried to bury inconvenient truths. And right now, the truth was whispering in the dirt beneath his boots. Someone on horseback had been here, close to the time Emily fell. As twilight deepened, the rangers were ordered to leave. Miller lingered for a moment, lowering his voice so only Harry could hear. "Please," he said. "Emily didn't just fall. I need your help to prove it." Harry looked once more at the hoof prints vanishing into the forest shadows. His gut told him Miller was right. Something hunted these mountains, and Emily Carson had crossed its path. By the time darkness settled over Rocky Pines, the official investigation had thinned to a handful of officers stringing up floodlights and marking evidence with numbered flags. Most of the curious hikers and families had been cleared out, their cars snaking down the narrow road out of the park. The forest now stood hushed, broken only by the faint hum of generators and the crackle of radios. Harry lingered near the trailhead, hands deep in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the hoof prints Miller had shown him. They curved away from the gorge, leading not toward the main trail but into the denser, wilder part of the forest. It wasn't just one set. At least 3 horses, maybe 4. And whoever rode them hadn't been in a hurry. The tracks were deliberate, almost casual, as if the riders knew they wouldn't be disturbed. Miller came up beside him, his ranger uniform now hidden under a plain jacket. He had defied the sergeant's orders and stayed behind. "They'll call it an accident," Miller muttered bitterly. "They'll write their report, pack up, and leave. Just like they always do." Harry glanced sideways at him. "And what do you think happened?" Miller hesitated. His fists tightened in his pockets. I think Emily was running from someone. And I think whoever it was chased her down. Harry studied the ranger's face, weighing his words. You mentioned more signs. What else did you see? Miller swallowed. There was something by the old pine tree near the ridge. A mark carved into the bark. Like a brand. Didn't look like kids messing around. Looked organized. Harry filed it away in silence. Symbols, hidden trails, horses, it painted a picture that felt less like an accident and more like a hunting ground. Just then, a voice barked from behind them. The sergeant again. Miller. I thought I told you to clear out. His eyes cut to Harry. And you, stay in your lane. The sheriff's office doesn't need cowboy stories about ghosts on horseback. Harry said nothing. He had learned that arguing with men like this only dug trenches deeper. But Miller didn't bite his tongue this time. He stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. She was my family. You think I'm just going to walk away? The sergeant's face reddened. He motioned to one of the younger officers. Escort him out. I don't want to see him here again. Miller's jaw worked as though he wanted to fight, but Harry caught his arm and pulled him back. Not here, Harry whispered. Later, as the sergeant stomped off, Harry and Miller slipped quietly away from the floodlit scene. They stopped near the ranger's truck, parked under the dark silhouettes of fir trees. Miller's voice dropped almost to a whisper. There's a tunnel, he said. Harry's brow furrowed. Tunnel? Miller nodded grimly. Old mining shaft. Half collapsed. Locals don't know it, but rangers do. It runs through the mountain to the other side, out of park territory. You could move just about anything through there, and no one would notice. Harry stared at him, the puzzle pieces aligning faster now. Horses. Carved marks. A girl running for her life. If Miller was right, Emily Carson hadn't just stumbled into danger. She had stumbled onto someone's secret, one they would kill to protect. The following morning, Detective Harry stood at the edge of the ranger station, staring out at the dense ridges of the national park. Mist hung low, clinging to the slopes like a shroud, as if the mountains themselves resisted revealing their secrets. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the trail of horse prints, the crude signs carved into tree trunks, and the ranger's words about riders who hunted men like prey. Claire approached quietly, her notebook in hand, and beside her was Ranger Thomas, the young man whose cousin had been the girl who died. His face carried the weight of grief but also a determined fire. Detective, Thomas said, we found something at the northern ridge. You'll want to see it. They set out on foot, following a narrow, winding path through the trees. The ground was damp, soft with fallen needles. Every few minutes Harry paused, scanning, listening. The silence of the park was unnatural, not the usual calm of nature, but a tense quiet, as though the forest itself anticipated violence. At the ridge, Thomas pointed toward a rocky outcrop. There, he whispered. Wedged between stones was a backpack, torn open, its contents scattered, a cracked phone, empty water bottles, a folded map marked with red circles. But the strangest thing was the horse tack lying beside it, leather straps, reins, still slick with sweat as if recently used. Harry knelt, examining the items carefully. The map's red circles marked trails deep inside the restricted parts of the park, places closed to visitors. These aren't random, Harry murmured. Someone's charting routes. Smuggling routes. Claire's eyes flicked toward Thomas. Could your cousin have known about this? Thomas swallowed hard. She might have. She was restless lately. Talking about money, about finding her way out. Maybe she saw something she shouldn't have. His voice broke slightly, but he steadied himself. Or maybe they used her. Harry pocketed the map, his instincts sharpening. This isn't just about a girl who fell. Someone's running operations through these mountains, organized, hidden, and protected. He looked toward the thick forest below. And they're using horses. Riders leave no trace on hard ground. That explains the disappearing tracks. As they turned back, a sharp crack split the silence. Gunfire. A bullet struck the tree beside Harry, splintering bark. Down, he barked, pulling Claire and Thomas toward cover. Another shot rang out, echoing through the ridge. They ducked behind boulders, the sound of hooves pounding faintly in the distance. Shadows moved between the trees, dark figures on horseback, their outlines barely visible. "They know we're here," Claire whispered, her voice tight. Harry's jaw clenched. Whoever was out there wasn't just hiding evidence, they were hunting anyone who came too close. He had walked into battlefields before, but this was different. The hunters knew these woods intimately, and they wanted him dead. As the sound of hooves faded, Harry exhaled slowly. "They're sending us a message," he said grimly. "Keep out, or end up like her." But Harry had never been one to walk away from a message written in blood. Back at the ranger station, tension filled the air like smoke after a gunfight. The local police had arrived in force, 2 patrol cars, flashing lights, and a commanding officer who seemed more interested in control than cooperation. Captain Reynolds, a broad man with a voice that filled the room, stood at the center, addressing the rangers like schoolchildren. "This is a police matter now," Reynolds barked. "No one moves without my orders. And that includes you, Detective Harry. I don't care what strings you've pulled to get here, but you're not running this investigation." Harry didn't flinch, though Claire bristled at Reynolds' tone. He had heard this all before, territorial officers who saw cases as trophies rather than truths. But what cut deeper was the sight of the rangers, including Thomas, standing helpless, their hands tied by bureaucracy while their land was bleeding secrets. Thomas stepped forward, his voice strained. "Captain, with all due respect, this is our park. We know these trails better than anyone. If you shut us out, you'll miss things that matter." Reynolds snapped back, "And if I let you meddle, you'll contaminate my case. I don't need amateurs stomping through crime scenes." Harry spoke then, his voice calm but firm. "Captain, your men are trained for city streets, not mountain ridges. You don't know what's hiding out there, but these rangers do. If you want results, you'll need us." The 2 men locked eyes, tension crackling. For a moment it seemed Reynolds might explode, but instead he waved a hand dismissively. "Fine. You can observe. But one wrong step, and you're gone. Clear?" It wasn't much, but it was enough. Harry exchanged a glance with Claire, silently agreeing that "observe" was just a word. They would dig deeper, no matter what Reynolds ordered. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mountains in hues of crimson and gold, Harry met with Thomas outside the ranger cabin. The young man's frustration was written all over his face. "They don't care," Thomas said bitterly. "They'll write this off as an accident if it keeps things simple. My cousin deserves better than that." Harry placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's why we won't stop. But we have to be smart. Whoever's behind this, smugglers, killers, they've got protection, maybe even eyes inside the system. That's why Reynolds wants us gone." Thomas nodded reluctantly. "Then we'll find another way. There's something I haven't told you yet, a tunnel. My cousin mentioned it once, like she was afraid of it. She never said where, but I think it's real. A passage through the mountains. If it exists, it could explain everything." Harry's pulse quickened. A tunnel meant routes, hiding places, escape lines. Smugglers would kill to protect it. "Show me," Harry said. Thomas hesitated. "Not yet. It's dangerous. We'll need the cover of night, and we'll need to lose Reynolds' men first." Harry's eyes narrowed as lanterns flickered in the police camp nearby. The hunters on horseback weren't the only ones they had to outsmart. Now, their enemies had uniforms, too. The mountains were growing darker as dusk crept in, painting the peaks in shades of violet and iron gray. Detective Harry adjusted his coat, his breath misting faintly in the cooling air. He had been on dozens of crime scenes before, but the weight of this one was different, an uneasy mix of wilderness and human cruelty. The deeper they ventured, the more the forest seemed to hold its silence like a secret. The ranger leading them, David, carried a lantern that cast thin arcs of light onto the trail. He had been quiet most of the way, but Harry could see the tension in his shoulders. David was more than just a guide, he was personally tied to this case. His niece, Anna, had been the young woman who'd fallen to her death. Official reports labeled it a suicide, maybe an accident. But David didn't believe it. He had begged Harry to look closer, to prove it was something more. As they reached a ridge overlooking a steep drop, Claire crouched down near the rocky ground. Her gloved fingers brushed against something small. She picked it up carefully, holding it under the lantern's glow. It was a silver chain, broken at the clasp. The kind that could have been ripped off during a struggle. Fresh, Claire murmured, her eyes narrowing. It hasn't been here long. Harry studied the area around them. The dirt was disturbed, boot prints scattered chaotically, as if someone had run in panic. Mixed in with the prints were deeper, heavier impressions. Hoof marks. Horses had been here, several of them, their patterns circling like predators. Not many people ride horses in this park, Harry said grimly. But these people do. David's face hardened. I've heard rumors. Riders who move at night. They're not tourists, they're smugglers. Locals whisper they run drugs through the old tunnels. But nobody dares confront them. And when someone sees too much, he let the sentence hang, unfinished. Harry exchanged a glance with Claire. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Anna wasn't just an innocent hiker in the wrong place at the wrong time. She may have stumbled upon something she shouldn't have seen, or worse, she had been involved. They followed the trail further, the hoofprints leading them into a narrowing gorge. The walls of stone closed in on either side, and the air grew colder, damp with the scent of moss. Then they found it, a concealed entrance carved into the rock. Barely visible, half hidden by brush. The tunnel mouth yawned dark and silent, like a wound in the mountain. Harry's flashlight pierced the blackness inside. Faint graffiti lined the stone, crude arrows and initials scorched with spray paint. And there, on the ground, were discarded items, wrappers, a crushed beer can, even a torn piece of fabric that looked eerily similar to Anna's jacket. This is it, David whispered. This is where they take people. For the first time that night, Harry felt the full gravity of what they were up against. This wasn't a lone killer, it was organized, dangerous, and hidden within the very bones of the park. He stepped closer to the tunnel, his voice low but resolute. If we go in, there's no turning back. Claire clicked her flashlight on beside him. Then let's not turn back. The tunnel breathed cold air, the kind that carried both damp earth and the faint metallic tang of rust. Detective Harry steadied his flashlight, its beam cutting a thin path through the darkness. Behind him, Claire adjusted her grip on her notepad, though she knew she wouldn't be writing much in there. Some places didn't demand notes, they demanded memory. Ranger David moved close, his lantern swinging low. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on the black throat of the mountain. I've been patrolling these trails for years, he whispered. Never knew this was here. Never thought it could exist. Harry crouched at the entrance, brushing away a scattering of fresh dirt. It exists because someone wanted it hidden. And they've been using it for a long time. The hoofprints from outside continued into the passage, overlapping with human footprints. Some light, some heavy, some dragging as if someone had been pulled. The silence pressed down on them as they advanced. Every sound they made seemed amplified, the crunch of boots on grit, the hollow echo of David's lantern handle tapping against stone. The walls glistened with moisture, their surfaces carved by both nature and human hands. They hadn't gone far when they found the first sign. A crate, shoved against the side wall. Dusty, but not ancient. Harry pried it open with the edge of his flashlight and froze. Inside were sealed packages wrapped in plastic, their corners marked with strange black symbols. Claire leaned closer, her breath catching. "Cocaine," she said softly. "And a lot of it." Harry nodded grimly. Anna must have seen this. Maybe even carried it for them. He turned to David. "Your niece wasn't just a witness. She was tangled in it." David's jaw tightened, his lantern trembling slightly. "No, she would never. She hated drugs." Harry closed the crate. His voice was careful, steady. "Sometimes people get caught up without meaning to. Promises of money. A way out. And when they change their mind." He let the rest fall into silence. David didn't reply, but the anguish in his eyes was louder than words. The tunnel bent sharply, narrowing until they were forced to walk single file. Graffiti scrawled across the walls, gang marks, coded initials, arrows pointing the way. Some were old, faded, others fresh, smeared like they'd been painted only days ago. At one bend, Claire's light caught something smeared onto the rock. She froze. "Harry, blood." A rusty streak, faint but unmistakable. It ran down the stone into a dark stain on the floor. Nearby lay a woman's sneaker, its white canvas soaked through. David's hand shot out, gripping the wall. His voice cracked. "That's Anna's. I bought those for her." Harry rested a hand on the ranger's shoulder. "Then this is where it happened. She was here. She fought." They stood in silence for a moment, the tunnel holding its breath with them. Then Harry straightened, his face hardening. "We're not alone down here." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" Harry lifted his flashlight higher. In the dust, not more than a few hours old, were clear prints. Boots. Several men. And leading deeper in, hoofprints again. Horses, inside the mountain. "They've been here tonight," Harry said. "And they could still be here." The thought settled heavy over them. The tunnel no longer felt empty, it felt watched. They pressed on, nerves taut. The passage widened into a cavern, a hidden chamber hollowed out from the stone. Lanterns hung from hooks, still burning faintly. More crates were stacked against the walls, some open, spilling their contents of powder-filled bags. A makeshift table sat in the center, littered with maps, radios, and cash. David's voice was a hoarse whisper. "This is their base." Harry's eyes swept the room, cataloging everything. "And it confirms what we feared, this isn't just a smuggling operation. It's organized. Funded. Protected." Claire pointed to the maps. "Look. These trails connect to the far side of the mountains. They can move drugs straight through the park, unnoticed." Harry's jaw clenched. "And anyone who discovers it, ends up like Anna." Before they could examine further, a faint sound echoed from deeper in the cavern. A horse's snort. Then voices, low, indistinct, but unmistakably human. Claire froze, her eyes wide. David reached for the hunting knife strapped to his belt. Harry extinguished his flashlight, plunging them into near darkness, save for the dim glow of the smugglers' lanterns. He whispered sharply, "Hide." They crouched behind the crates just as the sound of boots grew closer. Shadows moved along the wall, 3 men, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, laughing quietly. Their horses clopped against the stone as they led them into the chamber. One of the men tossed a bag of cash onto the table, his voice carrying. "Another run tomorrow night. Easy money. Nobody suspects a thing." The second man chuckled. "Except that girl. Stupid kid thought she could walk away." David stiffened, but Harry held him down with a firm grip. His eyes burned in the dark, but his voice stayed calm. Now we know. This is bigger than Anna. This is an operation. And if we're going to shut it down, we'll need proof, and backup. Claire nodded, whispering back. If we make it out alive. The smugglers' voices echoed off the walls, careless, unaware of the three hidden figures. The detective's pulse thundered in his ears. They were too deep to escape now. Too close to the truth to turn back. For Harry, there was no question. The tunnel wasn't just a crime scene anymore. It was a trap, and he was already inside it. The mountain air grew colder as the night wrapped itself tightly around the forest. Flashlights carved narrow tunnels of light through the darkness as Detective Harry and Ranger Mason pressed deeper into the old trails. The further they went, the more Harry sensed the weight of silence, not just the quiet of nature, but the kind that hides behind fear, as if the trees themselves didn't dare whisper. Behind them, a pair of uniformed rangers kept watch on the trail, ensuring no one could sneak up unnoticed. The team had finally received clearance to proceed with the investigation. The sheriff had reluctantly given Harry the green light, though with clear irritation. He didn't like being undermined, and Harry knew he'd have to deliver undeniable results to justify pushing back. Here, Mason whispered, pointing with his flashlight to the damp soil. Harry crouched down, eyes narrowing. Hoof prints. Fresh ones. The impression of horseshoes pressed deep into the mud. They're moving supplies, Harry muttered. Horses can carry loads where trucks can't. Mason nodded grimly. I told you, they use the upper trails. Nobody questions horses in a park. It blends right in. The realization chilled Harry. It meant the cartel, or gang, or whatever organized force they were facing, had thought this through. They weren't just reckless thugs. They had built an infrastructure inside the park, hiding in plain sight. The group advanced, guided by faint echoes, clinking metal, faint voices carried on the wind. Then they saw it, a ridge where the trail curved toward the mountainside. A glow flickered ahead, not from lanterns but from small fires hidden behind rocks. Figures moved, 3 men tending to saddled horses, their shapes outlined by firelight. Harry signaled with 2 fingers, lowering his body behind a fallen log. Mason and the rangers mirrored him. They were outnumbered, but not by much. The question wasn't whether they could confront the men, it was whether they could do it without spooking the entire operation. Harry pulled a small camera from his coat and began taking silent photos. Proof was as important as arrests. He zoomed in, capturing crates strapped to the horses. The stenciled markings weren't subtle, symbols that screamed of narcotics transport. One of the men glanced toward the trail, his face half-lit by the fire. Harry froze. It wasn't just any man, it was Victor Morales, a name Mason had mentioned earlier, one of the suspected smugglers with a long criminal history and ties to a cartel south of the border. If Morales was here, this was bigger than anyone had imagined. Suddenly, a twig snapped under one of the rangers' boots. The sound, though faint, carried like thunder in the silence. The men at the fire stiffened. Morales barked something in Spanish, drawing a gun from his belt. Down! Harry hissed, pushing Mason flat as bullets tore into the night. The forest erupted with chaos. Flashlights jerked wildly as gunfire lit up the trail. Horses reared, screaming, their hooves striking the ground like drums. Mason returned fire, his shots precise, while Harry flanked left, moving low across the dirt. One ranger took cover behind a tree, shouting into his radio for backup. Morales is running. Mason shouted. Harry caught sight of him slipping into the darkness with one horse, dragging a crate behind. Not this time, he muttered. Adrenaline surged through him. He sprinted across the uneven ground, dodging stray branches and muzzle flashes. His flashlight beam caught Morales's back just as the smuggler turned and fired. Splinters of bark exploded beside Harry's face. He pressed forward, firing 2 shots, not to hit, but to force Morales to dive for cover. When Harry finally reached the ridge, Morales had vanished into the shadows of the mountain. The sound of hooves echoed faintly, growing more distant by the second. The tunnel. It had to be the tunnel Mason had described earlier, the one that crossed beneath the ridge, connecting to the other side of the park. By the time Harry regrouped with Mason, 2 smugglers lay unconscious, disarmed, and zip-tied by the rangers. Another had fled into the woods. The fires still burned, crackling quietly as if mocking the sudden burst of violence. "Morales won't stop," Mason said, breathing hard. "He knows the land. He knows the tunnel. We need to move now or we'll lose him for good." Harry looked at the hoofprints leading into the dark, every instinct telling him this was their one chance. The tunnel wasn't just an escape route, it was the artery of the operation. If they found it, they'd find everything. "Then we don't wait," Harry said, reloading his pistol. "We finish this tonight." The group pushed forward again, their flashlights piercing the black veil of the forest. Every step carried them deeper into danger, but also closer to the truth. And Harry knew, whatever lay ahead inside that mountain would decide not only the case but the lives of everyone still tied to this brutal chain of violence. The chase wasn't over. It had only just begun. The forest thinned as Harry and Mason pushed forward, their flashlights bouncing off jagged rocks and tangled roots. The hoofprints were clear, Morales hadn't bothered to cover his tracks. He was in a hurry, desperate, and desperation made men careless. That was the edge Harry needed. They reached the base of the ridge, where the path seemed to vanish into stone. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a sheer rock face. But Mason crouched, pushing aside a cluster of branches. The beam of his flashlight revealed the dark mouth of a tunnel, wide enough for a horse to enter. "There," Mason said, his voice low. "The tunnel." Harry studied the opening. Cold air breathed out from within, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and something chemical, sharp and acrid. It wasn't just a passage, it was storage. "We'll need to move carefully," Harry warned. No idea how many could be inside. 2 rangers followed close behind, their radios crackling softly. Backup was on the way, but time was against them. If Morales slipped through to the other side, the cartel's lifeline would stay intact, and the girl's death would remain another forgotten tragedy. They entered the tunnel. The walls pressed close, rough and uneven, water dripping steadily from the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed in the confined space, each sound magnified until it felt like they were announcing themselves with every move. Then came the smell, thicker now, unmistakable. Narcotics. They turned a corner and froze. Stacks of crates lined the tunnel walls, lit dimly by a string of bare bulbs wired crudely along the ceiling. Some crates were marked with Spanish lettering, others with international shipping symbols. Cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, Harry didn't need to open them to know what they contained. "This isn't just smuggling," Mason muttered. "It's a distribution hub." A noise ahead cut him off, the clatter of hooves against stone, followed by voices. Morales wasn't alone. Harry motioned for silence, signaling the group forward. They crept closer, hugging the walls, until the tunnel widened into a crude chamber. 4 men stood there, Morales among them, barking orders as 2 others strapped crates to horses. Another kept watch, rifle slung over his shoulder. The tunnel curved again just beyond them, leading toward the open night on the far side of the mountain. "Now," Harry whispered. They surged forward. "Federal investigation. Drop your weapons." Harry's voice thundered in a confined space. The smugglers spun. One raised his rifle, but Mason fired first, his shot slamming into the stone inches above the man's head. Dust rained down. The gun clattered to the ground. Morales snarled, dragging a pistol from his belt. He grabbed one of the crates, using it as cover as he fired blindly into the tunnel. Bullets screamed past Harry, ricocheting off rock. The smell of gunpowder burned Harry's lungs. The Rangers returned fire, precise and controlled. One smuggler fell. Another threw his hands up, surrendering instantly. Morales, though, was relentless. He shoved his last crate onto a horse and slapped its flank. The animal bolted toward the far exit. Morales followed, vanishing into the shadows. "Harry!" Mason shouted. "He's getting away." Harry didn't hesitate. He sprinted after Morales, heart pounding in his chest, his boots hammering the stone floor. The tunnel narrowed, the air colder, his flashlight beam shaking with every stride. Ahead, he saw Morales swing into the saddle of the horse, kicking hard. The tunnel opened suddenly, spilling moonlight across the jagged terrain on the far side of the mountain. Harry raised his pistol. "Stop!" Morales turned, gun flashing. Harry dove, the bullet sparking against stone. He rolled, came up on one knee, and fired once, twice. The horse screamed, rearing violently as Morales lost his grip. He tumbled to the ground, his gun skittering across the dirt. Harry was on him in seconds, pinning him with his knee. Morales struggled, spitting curses, but Harry pressed the muzzle of his gun to the man's temple. "It's over," Harry growled. Mason and the Rangers rushed up, weapons trained. Morales froze, his chest heaving. In the moonlight, his face was pale with rage and fear. Cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. They dragged him back into the tunnel, where the surrendered smugglers sat bound against the crates. The Rangers radioed for transport and evidence teams. For the first time in hours, Harry let himself breathe. By dawn, the operation was dismantled. Crates of narcotics were hauled out of the mountain under federal escort. Horses were taken into custody by park services. Morales and his men were locked into armored vehicles, their empire collapsing behind them. Mason stood beside Harry at the ridge as the sun bled over the horizon, painting the park in gold and crimson. The night had been long, brutal, but the truth had been unearthed. "She didn't die for nothing," Mason said quietly. His voice was heavy, but steadier now. "They'll know what she went through. They'll know why." Harry nodded, his gaze fixed on the mountains. "And the park is safe again, for now." Mason gave a faint smile. "Until the next storm." Harry didn't answer. He knew Mason was right. There was always another storm waiting. But for this moment, standing in the glow of morning, with the tunnel sealed and the culprits behind bars, there was peace. For the girl whose life had been stolen, for the Rangers who fought to protect their land, and for the truth that refused to stay buried, justice had spoken. And Harry, as always, walked away with the weight of it on his shoulders.